Well, this was a hell of a season. Not to say that it was particularly good or bad, but mostly a mixture of both that could best be described as the taste of lukewarm water in my mouth. That is to say, nothing at all. And I didn't watch everything out this season, but at least a good chunk of it. Just looking down at the chapters for this video should tell you that. But hey, that's what the comments are for people to tell me how much of an idiot I am for not watching To Your Eternity. I'm a slave to my Patreon supporters and my own whims. What do you expect? Toss me $1 and you can vote. But forget about that for a few minutes and let's talk about this season. What I liked, thought was watchable, and what was so bad I'm just happy it's over with. That way we can put this whole thing behind me. The good shows were, a little lacking in retrospect, especially compared to the last few seasons. Not that they weren't there or weren't enjoyable, but nothing stood out so far above the pack that I'm excited to gush about it as it had in previous seasons. But there were a few that still managed to stand out nonetheless. Probably one of the shows I immediately gravitated to was Vivy, Fluorite's Song. When you grab the creator of ReZero and the scriptwriter for the anime adaptation of ReZero, oh, I guess he also did Chaos Child, good for him, you're bound to get some interesting stuff at least. And Teppei has really stepped out into his own as a writer, at least outside of ReZero recently with this and Warlords of Sigdrifa, which was pretty awful. But I like this one, as it really brings out his strong suit of interesting worlds that don't require a ton of building to explain. Strong characters with striking personalities, and varied twists keep the audience pulled into the story. Vivy is an overall engaging story that captures a character's journey over her 100-year mission, getting a perfect snapshot of the oddly human emotions born through AI evolution, and combining that with powerful visuals to make people question the series' core concept. What does it mean to have a heart? Or in the case of this anime, a soul. It's not a new question raised, as this isn't treading any ground most other AI stories don't step on. But it's certainly an interesting look on how AI would develop what we consider human traits, like jealousy, anger, determination, and ultimately creativity. I really like this one because it's not just a dumb action series playing deep, but actually does try to have a message, and looks amazing while doing it. Check this one out for sure. Hige o Soru Soshite Joshikousei o Hirou is a series that came close to falling apart. A 9-year gap between the protagonist, with a younger girl coming on super hard and actively trying to have sex with a 26-year-old, but ultimately comes down on the side of decency, using their relationship and him not being a piece of trash to help her come to terms with her past, deal with the mental abuse her mother inflicted, and make her realize what a real home looks like. But as it's a two-way street, she helped the main guy realize that there's more to life besides work, as he starts taking care of himself and building stronger relationships with his coworkers. This was a story about growing up, not physically, but mentally, and not allowing your past to define you, while also stressing the importance of close familial connections without blood ties. It's a bit dramatic and deals with some heavy themes, but it handles them well without being overly dark. The animation was mostly okay, as in polished and competently done, but the story is what really had me coming back each week to see how Sayu and Yoshida both grew as people and in their relationship. A highly recommended drama series for sure. I'm not really sure why I liked Odd Taxi as much as I did, because this show is so loosely told. It has a story, but one that's so interconnected through its various characters and told in a roundabout way that it feels almost like experimental storytelling at times. Seemingly unrelated events and people slowly build a puzzle, with this jaded, disgruntled middle-aged taxi driver as the focal point, involving gangs, attempted murder, a small-time idol group, struggling comedians, internet sensationalist bandwagoning, and lottery winnings that you almost forget the inciting incident for this was a girl going missing. And for a while, it tricks you into thinking that that's what the story is here. But it isn't, as it's about who Odokawa is and how he, as a random taxi driver, fits into and changes the lives of those he's around. The characters in this series are incredibly deep and real, suffering from mundane issues like realizing you're getting old and you're poor, so you lie on a dating app, to fears of being left behind by your work partner, and the pressure of being an online influencer chasing trends. And it all just works so well together. But I'm worried that the comedic style and dramatic tension is a little too me to be widely applicable. I never thought I'd find a hipster rapping on a scooter to be intimidating, but here we are. This is such a realistic and human approach to weird situations. The animation here is brimming with style, using cartoonish anthropomorphic animals and some construction paper-esque textures to create a weird picture book aesthetic. I love this series, and more people should definitely be looking at it. Zombieland Saga Revenge continued to be a joy this season. Continuing with a minor time jump from the first season, after a failed massive concert, we're immediately hit with the confirmation that this is still the series we loved previously. I will admit, the humor this season wasn't as hard-hitting as it was previously, but in return we got some nice moments to build up the story beyond, here's some resurrected zombie girls in an idol group who succeed repeatedly against the odds. There's failure, there's consequences, there's growing stakes, as the group gets more popular, and their identities are essentially found out this season. And it marries that with the idea of redemption, getting that second chance since the cast has had theirs as zombies, so now it's their group's turn. I felt like I didn't necessarily learn more about the cast, but still grew closer to them, which is a plus, and why I'm still loving this season, as it was revisiting an old friend. Highly recommended as a continuation to an already great series. I touched on how much I'd normally hate Ijiranaide Nagatoro-san in my season preview, but screw suspense, since I'm still heaping praise on shows in this section. I like this series a lot. Cringe humor isn't my cup of tea, but seeing this dude flail about miserably while getting teased by some obnoxious vapid high school girls actually made that work. How? By showing that it's just in good fun, that even their own group isn't beyond reproach. And while Nagatoro teases him, she's doing so because she likes him. She's just a sadistic person at heart, who gets off on making people squirm. Plus, the main dude takes it like a champ, growing a bit of a spine in the process, and gets a few jabs back in to show this isn't a one-way street, effectively salvaging the humor here. But at its core, it's a pretty warm romance series about two high school kids of opposite personality types coming together for a weird friendship that blossoms into something more. For animation though, I did definitely like the personality this one had. It had some interesting line work, and knew how to use its visual humor effectively, showing me that this is more than just the meme online with Nagatoro's face. Definitely a must check out for slice of life comedy fans. Dynazenon was a great throwback to a simpler time with its cheesy premise and genre of choice, but with good animation and a plot that doesn't take itself too seriously, while still having some hard-hitting themes. I loved how this played with the giant robot and Sentai series tropes of having these weird people show up in a pretty average town, while the more normal members of the cast are thrown for a loop by it, but ultimately go along with the craziness in typical Trigger fashion. That's how you can tell that this is a love letter to the genre, by poking fun at the tropes but still using them effectively. However, what kept me coming back was how this series got the cast to come together and stick, with each having some issues they're dealing with and the monster battles being an escape from that, like retreating into fantasy escapism to cope. But the metaphor that you can't do that forever and seeing the cast move beyond their problems to confront, accept, and face them is truly a heartwarming experience. It tells this story not through expository dialogue, but through character interactions you may not have even noticed as they're talking over one another most of the time, and some creative use of cinematography to convey these points. I'm really impressed with this, and looking forward to more from the Gridman universe, all reminding me why Trigger is one of my favorite studios, yet again. Next, let's look at the ones that didn't make the cut. These are shows that are watchable, but lacked what it took to stand out as good, either because of too many flaws holding them back, or because they just fell into too many cliches to rise above their peers. These are ones that carry either a conditional recommendation, or I wouldn't stop people if they're telling me they're gonna check them out. This may come as a shock because Seijo no Maryoku wa Bannou desu was one of the shows that captivated me this season. I legitimately was looking forward to each episode, but yet it managed a middling spot. Why is that? Well, I guess it has a lot to do with its isekai origins. It handles the tropes well, no doubt, but ultimately it still follows them too closely to really stand out. My praise for this series extends quite far, as it is a strong female protagonist, one who isn't immediately thrown into the savior role, but more importantly, it let the audience spend time with Sei as a person. We saw her struggling to find a place in the alchemy research branch, and even building a budding romance with a high-ranking knight. That makes this series cute, relatable, and relaxing. But the problem is, outside of that, it doesn't leave a ton of impact. The art style and animation is fine, but it lacks anything really technically impressive to keep me engaged, and the main storyline just feels like a more mature approach to isekai without using paper-thin villains. But that's a low bar to clear, not something that elevates it to greatness, if you know what I mean. Which is why I stuck it here. recommended for isekai fans, or for those looking for a light fantasy romance series. I feel bad for the isekai fans who jumped into Slime Taoshite-san Byakunen Shiranai Uchi ni level max Nattemashita this season, expecting your typical isekai shenanigans with an OP protagonist saving the world, only to get suckered into a lesbian harem show too shy to play into its demographic. In all seriousness, this was a franchise I forgot was an isekai most of the time, because it didn't really smack you in the face with the other world crap, really outside the first episode. It's more just a slapstick and gag anime that takes place in a fantasy setting. The characters are the main draw, all of which are cute girls of varying archetypes that pretty much nails every otaku preference, and that's probably why people are watching it. But not me though, I say from up on my high horse. I didn't get suckered in by the wholesome hugging and barely contained jealousy of every character wanting the protagonist to fawn over them. I thought the humor alone was entertaining enough to warrant me watching, by sometimes outright ignoring the fantasy aspects of the show to insert modern aesthetics that clash culturally. And not because of the isekai protagonist. As usual, cute, slightly funny, and a pretty relaxing watch, so it has my recommendation for people looking for a chill anime. Yakunara Mug Cut Mo fits the bland slice of life genre to a T, but instead of talking about anime and manga the whole time, it's busy talking about ceramics. The concept for this is almost a pitch or love letter to an area of Japan that doesn't get much attention, and I get the appeal there. But sadly, there's just nothing to really talk about with this show, since it's either some rural Japanese scenery porn, or history lessons about ceramic making in that region, strung together by an almost annoying cast that would have had a hard time standing out in a better show. Everything about the production is competent, I believe I said that before in my preview, but the subject matter failed to leave an impact on me. The only saving grace was this was a short runtime, being half-length episodes. So you can knock out the entire series in like an hour and a half, if you're binging it. Recommended for people into slice of life shows about niche topics. Surprise, surprise, Kumo desu ga Nani ka kept going this season, and I feel like I actually enjoyed it more. Too bad one of my main issues with it is that about half the series is completely uninteresting. I like Kumiko because she's an endearing protagonist that actually livens up the crazy shit she's experiencing, mostly because she can't understand a lick of the language, and it's not like most of the things around her can talk anyway, so that means it's all gestures and her interpretation. So her off-the-wall observations, improv comedy, and dumb remarks are how the audience identifies with her. I don't even care it's an isekai power trip at that point, since it manages to be engaging. The other reincarnations are another story, as I really can't bring myself to care about them in the slightest. Like, I don't care about Shun's brother dying, his family getting murdered, his rivalry with Hugo, or his journey to the Elf Village, because that's all so melodramatic, expected, and takes entirely too long. The other bad thing is the animation. God damn it, Millipensi, you've struck again with your 3D animation for humanoids and outdoor environments being fucking awful. This should tell you something, that while I hate the animation and half of the cast, it's still ranked in a middle slot. When, or if this gets a season 2, give me more Spider and get rid of the excess. Also, please, just find a better studio. Tensura and Nikki was certainly a slice of life show based on Tensura. I don't have anything really to say about this because there's no plot here. I thought the humor was decently executed and the animation was done well enough, but this is a slice of life side story that has zero impact on the series as a whole, which means it left no impact on me either. Watch it if you like Tensura a lot, I guess. Moving on. I honestly thought I would like Mars Red a ton, but too bad this series just falls apart from the halfway point on. There was a lot of potential here to just have some cool vampire fights, sabotage, and warring governments using vampires for espionage, or even just their ageless perspective on how Japan is advancing so quickly around that time. Hell, I'd have just taken a series that was more about vampires, but they turned them into a minor plot point, while the vampire cast might as well have not even been vampires. The plot is confusing and takes a hard turn out of nowhere into steampunk fantasy, when all I wanted was Meiji-era vampire fights. The animation was nice, however, using some interesting camera work while maintaining its unique style from the first episode, but that wasn't enough to salvage the needlessly complicated plot that doesn't really seem to matter much, especially as far as the cast is concerned, because they're almost coincidental to the storyline itself. I had mixed feelings on Dragon Ieo Kao. I liked it enough as a slice-of-life comedy series mocking role-playing gaming tropes, both tabletop and video, but ultimately, while it brought a smile to my face, poking fun at stats, how inconsequential death was, and bags of holding, oddly enough, I didn't really find much to really keep me coming back each week. Sure, the jokes are great for a screen cap to share with your D&D group, but the characters were about as one note as the jokes, so there wasn't really any overarching plot to keep me coming back besides house hunting, which is much more of a launching pad for different ideas as opposed to an actual storyline, and the series even treats it like that. It's not amazing, but if you're looking for a no-frills fantasy comedy series, this will certainly scratch your itch, especially if your D&D nerd friends like anime too. You want to post some pics. Well, now that the good and middling are out of the way, let's talk about the bad, because there was a lot of that this season. And I feel sort of bad myself for lumping all these in together in this category, because, well, there's degrees of bad, and I'm gonna make the mistake of leaving the nuance up to you, the viewers. So let's get into it. Not all isekais got a middling ranking this season, with Isekai Maoto Shokan Shoujo no Dore Majutsu being fucking awful. I know that's a bit harsh, but whatever. I'm sure the people who like this franchise already aren't looking for my views on it. Anyway, this one took the worst parts of the first season, the obnoxious main character's inner monologue and downright intrusive ecchi elements, and cranked them up to 11 to the point that's almost all this series had left. Plus the usual slew of dumb, overused isekai tropes with no redeeming factors. This is what happens when a series lumbers on long after its arcs have concluded. It has to introduce new characters and rehash plot threads to keep its core fanbase watching despite not offering anything actually new. And that's where we're at, sticking with people who have to find a reason to keep adventuring. Sure, the animation is more polished than Season 1, but I would hope so after about 3 years, a new director, studio, and an entirely new art and animation staff. I'm disappointed, but I don't even know why. Having seen the first season, I knew what to expect, but here I am, somehow wishing this had improved despite the new shine. If you haven't watched Season 1 and are looking for a new isekai to check out, go watch a different one. Osana Najimi ga Zettai Makenai Love Comedy I almost liked. It had the makings of a somewhat enjoyable show with its absurd escalations and baking these big shot reveals into the characters, but ultimately I'm not digging it because it's, well, not really doing anything. The premise of the childhood friend character breaking out of the hopeless, closeted, lovesick sideline role, only to reveal her obvious feelings at the end and be rejected for the main heroine by having her take the reins of the dynamic and make the main protagonist fall in love with her, sounds like it'd be a great subversive love plot that's rife with possibility for genre critique, but it doesn't do that. Instead, it resets the dynamic to square one by episode 3 with the caveat that she might actually have a chance. So from there, it's your average love comedy anime plotline, and the animation was severely disappointing. I talked about the awkward framing and, frankly, odd use of its animation budget in my season preview, and those issues really didn't shape up as this went on. I've seen enough of these already, and this one really didn't impress me. This is a hard pass. It's probably a popular opinion to hate on Koito Yobu wa Kimochi Wari, and I'm not hating on it because, ew, gross, the age gap, because that's not what's wrong with this show. Here's the thing. Its humor is cringy, and the level of persistence the main protagonist has while pursuing the female protag is borderline stalking and criminal, while also abusing his role as an adult and his money to make her go along with his antics. That's what's gross about this story, and it knows that. But hey, it basically just shrugs that off and says he's a good guy at heart, and the high school girl changed him to be a better person, and tries to play the creepiness off as charming in the last episode. Plus, I guess it's okay, he's gonna wait till she's 18. Yeah, that's pretty much missing the point, but in terms of plot, I can't say it's awful. There's decent character arcs and everything flows well, but it's held back by how it trips in its execution. It's not unwatchable, but predictable story beats and an off-putting premise hamper it. For animation, it's also pretty decent, but the CG background characters in most scenes really were distractingly noticeable. Plus, the audio sounds like it was recorded in a closet with a lot of echo and tinniness. When YouTubers can record better audio off USB mics in their bedrooms, you can tell you probably fucked up. Anyway, this wasn't my thing, so I'm giving it a pass. Eden Zero I basically dropped because I couldn't bring myself to care about it. So bad it didn't even get licensed in the West for release. Yeah, I'm not shitting you, there were no distributors. So that meant using fan translators for a pretty bland product that's a standard shonen affair, with beyond gratuitous fan service using reskinned derivative characters from the author's previous work. That's something I'm chomping at the bit for more of, so dropped and not recommended. Not when there's better shonen battle franchises out there, even this season. Sayonara Watashi no Kramer was a fucking mess. I got some serious Tamayomi vibes from the bad animation and low-budget sports anime feel, but the story here isn't my problem. It's purely the animation, which felt like a throwback to the 90s. An art that looked somewhat creepy in stills, with small, wide-set eyes and deadpan expressions that make this downright unbearable. And while I can get behind the story, that doesn't mean that it's perfectly fine, since the script is piled high with sports anime cliches. We have the typical underdog team that's suddenly given a chance by a group of talented new players, but they struggle to come together as a team until they manage to start doing so, only to fall short for some comedic reason so they can keep being the underdog that's perpetually about to be knocked out of whatever tournament they're in. Oh, and bonus points for the new go-getter coach that used to be a professional. Okay, so sure, the animation gets better towards the end. You can certainly tell they curbed their budget for the last few episodes, but that doesn't mean it's forgivable for the majority of the series, because that's what I'm stuck watching most of the time. Easy to give this a pass. Blue Reflection Ray I somehow overestimated in my preview. I expected this show to be middle of the road, but I was wrong. It had a really slow and confusing plot that trips over itself in the early stages for a lackluster payoff in its first core that makes me wonder why this was even made. A quick way to piss me off with a magical girl show that's trying to be deep or dark is learning about the setting of the show, and I don't know shit about the lore of this world after 12 episodes, or what the fuck these people even are. That's not to say the show doesn't try to explain it, but it throws out terms without telling me what they mean or are, and just runs with it. The struggle isn't super defined beyond these characters are good, these ones are bad, so they're fighting, even though it tries to hint that there's some gray area, but only introduces that by having a brainwashed villain. The art is where I'm most disappointed, however. It looks pretty in stills, so props to the actual artists, but it's stilted when moving, because it's like the animators are terrified that a single frame might not look like the ideal Bishoujo. So that's not a problem with the keyframes there, that's entirely in the tweening. This series just fails to amount to anything, and I found myself unable to care about the cast or their world-ending problem. So, guess what? It's an easy pass. Not looking forward to that second core. Joran, the Princess of Snow and Blood, was another case of too many balls in the air. Between the politics, the main character's revenge plot, the revenge plots of the side characters, the utter mess of motivations that contradict and get in the way of, and add in the Meiji's pseudo-future setting with monsters, and you get a train wreck of ideas that each could have made for an interesting plot in of itself. You know, instead of all of them fighting for the spotlight and don't support or flow together to make a cohesive work, it was almost like it was too drunk on its own concepts to figure out how these pieces fit together, while trying to be flashy, gory, and suspenseful on top of that, without investing any of the groundwork to justify all that. Not to mention the wannabe 5D chess bullcrap it tries makes the convoluted plot tedious to follow, because it's not super hard to, but it thinks it's more clever than it really is. In essence, it's like if anime tried to do a soap opera plot. Having wrapped up the main character's goals before the halfway point left this series with a struggling identity, because it never tried to have a message about what she should do after her revenge was complete, just trying to give her new reasons to do the whole revenge thing again. And that's all further ruined by the lack of a strong climax with little agency on the main character's part. That put this series in a bad spot. I'd blame the writer, but she's only had one other show's writer credit to her name. While it looked nice, that's about all I had going for it, with nice animation, interesting designs and style, but the substance felt spread too thin. If I tried to submerge myself in the puddle of this show, I'd hit the bottom before I even got my nose in. This is a pretty easy pass. I guess that's it. Despite me watching the most shows I've watched to date for this channel this season, it didn't really hit me with anything too spectacular. Sure, I enjoyed Zombieland Saga, Dynazenon, and Odd Taxi, but I had to sift through a mountain of mundane comedy shows that lacked identity to get to those. Next season I'm probably going to watch fewer, so I can stay more on top of this, as it was a pain to keep up with all these. But mostly I'm just hoping summer manages to do better. But for now, hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. Here's my obligatory Patreon plug where you can vote on what I'll watch next season. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to Nadeshiko for their continued support. Thanks for watching.